All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have Joe Corkery, a former colleague of mine and founder and CEO of Jaide. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, you did a LinkedIn post that really caught my eye around how to get customer feedback and different approaches to testing and validating, uh, business ideas and product ideas. But before we dive into that, maybe we could just start with a little bit of a background about you and what you're working on.
Yeah, sure. Just super quick background. I was both a software engineer, physician, and business development person for a while. Spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical space doing computational drug discovery before I moved to Google in 2014. I was hired to start their healthcare team in Google Cloud, but quickly learned that the world wasn't ready, or Google wasn't ready to do healthcare. So I spent the next 2.5 years doing security, compliance, and privacy work at Google, and then started up the healthcare and life sciences team in Google Cloud around 2017, and ran that product org for about 5 years before moving to other roles at Google, and then starting this venture about 2 years ago.
Yeah. So tell me about the genesis of the venture that I understand has gone through a pivot. So,
Yeah.
But what was V1?
I mean, yeah. So it was really interesting. I think when we started this, we had a thesis that there were lots of really interesting things that healthcare executives were asking us to build at Google that Google was not building.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we had heard a lot was, I want to combine my patients or my members healthcare information with search to help them discover things that are relevant to their healthcare conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, but combining healthcare and search was always there was a bit of firewall there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were really excited about it, and we decided to really we could build that on the outside, giving you the ability to and you could provide your healthcare information, and then we could provide guided search for the healthcare content that you wanted. And we actually ended up going deep down to a women's health focus, and really digging into how you might think about search for sensitive content and information that you might not want to do elsewhere. And it was fascinating. Every single person we talked to was like, "This is a great idea. I love it. This is so needed. Please build this." But at the same time, trying to get customers to sign up for it, early on, or getting VCs to invest, was proving to be kind of a challenge. And so it was this real interesting dilemma of well, is it how do I know if if this is the right thing, if I'm not just trying hard enough on the customer side or the VC side? Because I mean, honestly, raising money and getting customers, there's a low hit rate there. So it's hard to know whether you're just in the normal average, or without actually going out, if hit rate is 20-30%, let's say, you have to do a bunch before you actually figure out whether you're getting that hit rate. And so we started thinking about, well, how best could we test whether this was we just needed to talk to more people, or whether we really needed to do something new. And that's where so then we went back to sort of okay, well, what other things were we thinking about? And I have to say, when we were at Google, everybody was saying, "Google, please make Google Translate work in healthcare." And so we're okay, and that was another idea we had, where we could see there was a lot of excitement from customers early on beforehand. And with the advent of generative AI, we're okay, I think this might be the time to build that, and to do that. And so what we ended up doing was, we started talking to people, And instead of like when we would talk to VCs or we would talk to like CMIOs at hospitals, we pitched it. We changed the conversation from, "Hey, like we're building this thing. Would you be interested?" to, "I'd really love to get your advice on this. I'm, starting a new company. We're building a new product. Here are the two, here are the two products that we're, thinking about building. You know, what do you think? Which one should we do?" And which was great because people all of a sudden would look at it differently. They would actually dig deep into the both the pros and the cons of both products because I would say it's a little tricky if like both of your ideas are bad. I'm not sure everybody's gonna like they're still going to want to tell you one over the other, so
Mhm.
you need to be able to say like you know, you need to have your own threshold for like, it's like, A, B, or neither. And I think maybe actually telling people or neither is a valid option. But for us, it was really pretty powerful because I started talking to a couple of folks and they're like, absolutely, translation, huge need. We have that. The other like a lot of people were like, we really love your other idea, but we don't know who's going to pay for it.
Mm.
And there was a lot of pushback around like, now is not the time to invest in like consumer health products where like you need to build a user base and things like that. So that was good feedback. And then I did something more deliberate. So there was the big health conference in October, and I just kind of showed up to that and tracked down every single person I knew and put this question to them of like, here's you know we're trying to decide which one to do. Please help.
Mhm.
And amazingly, to a T, every single person said, do translation. And then we had and it was great. And like they had lots of people um, gave us really good, helpful feedback along the way around like, you know, here are the pros and cons. And so there were a lot of people who was like, oh, this is great, but like here are the roadblocks I see that you're going to encounter on this side. So you're gonna have to think about those if you choose to go down that. And so it was like it was yeah, it was a pretty powerful tool. And I think when you frame it as help me make a choice, um, it changed the way people thought about how they gave you feedback. And especially then also used to give you, they were better at saying, here's where I see the potential problems with both choices, and as well as the potential advantages. So it's great for, for people who like to make pro con lists. It's a great framework.
Yeah, this reminds me of my founder days where I had used a lot of design thinking kind of approaches and coffee shop interviews and things like that. And I later learned that at least the people I interviewed like generally wanted to be supportive
Yeah.
and they go, "Oh yeah, that's a really cool idea." um Almost even if if you gave them a bad idea, they would find something nice to say about it. I think
Yeah.
we're kind of conditioned to communicate that way, even if the founder's like, "No, I really want your honest feedback." But I think what you've done with framing it as a choice, it feels like it gives them permission to be like, "Oh, okay, I don't have to just, be positive encouragement for you. I kind of have permission now to kind of tell
Yeah.
you what I really think." Yeah.
Exactly, because I feel like when you're asking people, like like in the early days, like when I'd be talking to my friends and like you know they were everyone was looking for positive things to say,
Mhm.
and because everybody wanted to be supportive, they're like, oh great, you're on this new founder journey doing that,
Yeah.
and everybody wants to lift you up, which is awesome, but also makes it hard to tell whether you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, there is always one person in your social network who's gonna like, tell you that whatever you're working on is a terrible idea. And like those people are great. You should always go get advice from them.
Yeah.
Now, and so I think that's super useful. But you're right. It's like most people like, especially if you frame it as this is what I am doing. What do you think? People are like, oh, like you've committed to this, so like I don't
Mhm.
really want to like tell you I think it's a stupid idea.
Mhm.
And but if you're like, oh, here's what I'm trying to decide between, yeah, it gives permission to be critical. in a way that I think most people don't feel that they have, when just given one choice.
And I guess the risk of the this or that is that I guess you could have a local maxima where it is technically better than the other idea, but it's still not as good as you need it to be. How do you think about that
Yeah, I
risk?
mean, it's not a perfect framework for all decision making, but I think it's um, I mean, I think the key thing is like it's like I'm trying to make a choice between either of these, but also being open to the idea that like you know maybe neither is the best choice.
Hmm.
And I think that's it's a level of complexity that I think you know you have to bring in. But I also feel like the opportunity is that when you say I'm trying to decide, but actually the other one of the ways that we framed it is say like I'm trying to decide what we want to do. Here are my two leading contenders.
Mm.
What do you think? And I think if you like, because that I do remember taking that approach with a number of folks. So um, when you frame it as like these are my leading contenders, it still means that there's room for other dark horses to come in and overtake that as well. So I think that like that might be a similar approach that you might take. But you're right. Like you are you know in that framework you're kind of confined to the options that you're presenting. Now, sometimes you get lucky and people would be like, oh, actually, like I think it's great that you're doing those things. Here's something adjacent that I've been thinking about. And that's amazing, but it's also like doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah, it reminds me of I remember doing one uh, sort of customer discovery interview, and we had this idea.
Mhm.
We were excited about it, and then the customer was like, "Yeah, it's kind of cool, but this isn't really like my biggest problem that
Mhm.
it's solving." And then I remember pausing and then just asking like, "Well, what is your biggest problem?"
Yeah.
And it was amazing because
Yeah.
then, she was like, "Oh, this is my problem." And we're like, "Oh, well, we could solve that."
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I'm amazed at how often, like, the sometimes the biggest problem they have, like maybe adjacent to your problem, and is actually easy to solve as part of
Yes.
solving your problem.
Yep.
Like we definitely saw that early on with one of our customers, where like we were looking at like how do we grow utilization and traction, and like they were happy with the product, but they were really small things that like were part of their workflow that were getting in the way of them using the product more.
Mhm.
And like so we sat down and did a little discovery with them, and I'm like, oh, that's the way you do this? And I'm like, I can automate that away. And like, and so like, like a week later, we had taken that part, we basically incorporated that part of the workflow into our workflow and just fully automated it. And like then we saw this huge uptick in utilization. Not because we made, you know, our product any better. We just, you know, took their problems that we decided to solve their, the thing that blocked them from getting to our product. So that for me, it's fascinating to see like, but that is a great question. Like what is the problem you actually have? And I think
Yeah, exactly.
or I mean, a similar great question is, what is a problem that you have that you are willing to pay to solve?
Mhm.
And because there are, and this is, I think, tricky in healthcare because there are, a lot of healthcare folks are very academic, and so they like to do research and studies, and it's like, okay, well, like, which are problems that actually have like, a financial ROI for you versus like this would be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, and so when you think about Jade's translation stuff, how
Yeah.
do you think about the problem that it's solving for customers, and how does it have an economic benefit?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a couple ways that we think about it, and I think one of the key things to think about is that there roughly 8% of the U.S. population doesn't speak English well enough to actually communicate with a healthcare provider. So it's
Mm.
like 25 million patients, and these patients objectively have a worse experience in the healthcare industry. So they have longer lengths of stay. They are more likely to be readmitted or to come back to the ER instead of doing a follow-up phone call. They have more medical errors happen to them when they're in the hospital, and they just have a lower quality experience and generally not as great outcomes. Um, but what's interesting is that, like, if you provide comprehensive language services, a lot of those inequities go away. And so, what you can do, like, by, so this is one of the things we're excited about, because right now, most of the way that language services are provided today are through either in-person interpreters or
Hmm.
through remote phone or video interpreters, which has been a huge win because you often can't have in-person people all the time.
Hmm.
So that's been a big change, but still access to them can be really challenging, especially in rare languages and in, outside business hours. And so there are lots of patients who don't get seen because you can't get access to those services. And so as a result, so this is where AI can kind of come in and actually fill an important gap. It's like there are lots of really quick conversations that people don't have because of the friction in the system to get a human involved. Especially if there's a wait time and introductions. And so what we see is being able to provide the opportunity to, enable sort of that comprehensive, like, so you can have those quick, short conversations. You can interact with, like, front desk, billing, elsewhere, where you wouldn't, like, where maybe they wouldn't actually get those services for you, but also with, like, written instructions. So, like, being able to get your discharge instructions translated, or the after visit summary, or patient portal messaging. And um, and one of the great things about this is that, realistically, what happens is often people rely on family members to do
Hmm.
this for them, and which is really not a great outcome, especially because oftentimes it's children being asked to do the translation, and children really shouldn't be doing the translation for their parents. And so there's a huge gap in this need there. So, but to get back to your point of, like that's kind of the why. Like, we want to provide a better experience for this patient population, eliminate all these healthcare inequities for that population. Um, Now, like, on the hospital return side, they're both direct and indirect benefits. And so on the direct side, like, providing language services today is expensive. An in-person interpreter could cost anywhere between $45 to $100 an hour, and you're usually paying for, like, all the time they're there, not just the time that they're interpreting. Um, Remote and phone-based interpreters are anywhere between $1 to $4 a minute, depending on the language, the time of day, the service that you're using. And written translation, that's like 15 to 25 cents a word, with, like, a 2 to 5 day turnaround time. Which is kind of useless in healthcare, because, like, if you can't get the discharge instructions at discharge, that doesn't help.
Hmm.
And so, for us, the ability to bring AI into this means that we can reduce a lot of those costs. So we can help healthcare organizations directly save money by reducing the existing line items that they're spending against right now for language services, while also expanding the um, quality of care that they're providing. But the longer term indirect benefit to this is well, if we're actually able to help you provide comprehensive language services, you're going to see patients going home sooner. They're not going to be blocked on not having a discharge or not being able to say that. So, like, you're going to see length of stay come down. You're going to see readmission rates go down. Ideally, you're going to see error rates go down. And all of those things have a direct financial impact for a hospital. So, like, staying a day shorter means the hospital doesn't have to pay for that extra day, but it also means that they can fill a bed
Hmm.
with a new paying patient. So, like, there's sort of like a double win for them of, like, they don't have the excess costs of a overlong stay, and they actually are able to bring in new revenue from an additional patient, because it's not like hospitals have a supply problem. There are always patients waiting to fill those beds, and so the sooner that you can um, discharge someone on time, the sooner you can drive overall revenue to a hospital. And given that hospitals operate on some pretty tight margins, like, you know, you know, moving the needle here can make a big difference. So that we're excited about that.
And Joe, what's your take on the doctor or the hospital or the patient using consumer tools and just firing up
Yeah.
ChatGPT or
Yeah,
Google?
I would say the dirty secret is they already do.
Hmm.
And, like, almost every clinician we've talked to said, I use Google Translate for this. I know I'm not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, like most hospitals ban it on their corporate network. So you can't actually get to translate.google.com on a
Mm-hmm.
corporate network. Um, so they use their personal devices. So even worse.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they're like, well, what do you want me to do? Not treat the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we kind of think about like the value we're providing in sort of kind of three different buckets in this, because like there are definitely consumer tools out there for it, but like one, providing healthcare organizations with that security, privacy, compliance framework around the tools and technology so they can get comfortable with using it. The second is actually thinking about this from this is a healthcare specialized or a healthcare focused tool. So we're actually able to optimize and guide a lot of the translations specific to the clinical use cases. We bring in custom glossaries for the different languages, for the different healthcare terminology. And, with healthcare organizations, we can also specialize them for those specific institutions. We see a lot of institutions like they have very specific ways they want things translated, oftentimes like don't translate our name, or we talk about this terminology, and so it allows us to really go deep with those customers to optimize specific for where they're spending a lot of time. And so if if historically the translations they were doing weren't missing things, we can optimize that for them. And I think third, we can actually spend a lot of time thinking about, well, how do we integrate deeply with your clinical workflows, understanding where does this fit, how does it work, and where do we need to exist in this ecosystem for them. And so that's like that's kind of how we think about it. I think like the there are great consumer translation tools out there, but at the same time, like those are great for travel. They're great for I mean, or interacting with folks. But I think when you get to a world where you're worried about security and privacy, and you're also worried about like specialized terminology, that is where a lot of the more um, specialized tools come into play. And I think one of the things that we've certainly found, there's actually been number of papers looking at like the quality of Google Translate, ChatGPT, and others on doing translations of discharge summaries. And the quality is actually pretty high, with just using sort of like single shot.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, um, when you compare that against a sort of a more sophisticated approach where you're doing, we tend to do a lot of like pre-analysis on the English. We do translation, we do review, we do refinement, and having a real multi-step process there significantly improves the quality of translations. And we see that in the feedback from the interpreters and translators who we have review content, where they're like, okay, like that was okay. Like, they look at like, from Google Translate or ChatGPT, like that was okay, but like this is like completely different. And I think I think you're also much more prone to hallucination in sort of those single shot translations that you would see more broadly.
Joe, you have been on a founder journey for a few years now. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice. What would you tell Joe, 5 years ago or whenever?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I mean, what would I tell? I think, you know, being more deliberate about getting the feedback as soon as possible would be big. Really trying to um, get into get the tools into people's hands as fast as possible. I think, especially in healthcare, delivery times can be really long because of healthcare processes, and so really starting those conversations um, very early, like oftentimes like even pre-product, like it's like have that conversation, see if they're excited, um and then like come back to them after you've built it, or see if they're willing to pay you to build it.
Mm,
Like I I feel like I should have asked more people to pay me to build it early on, which would have been great. I mean, I think they're happy that I've built it now and that it but it's but I do think like as like starting on your founder journey is like finding the people who are willing to pay you on spec
mm.
um, for that idea is certainly a big one I would think about. But I mean, ultimately, I think surrounding yourself with finding a great problem, surrounding yourself with a good team, with a great team, and then I think acknowledging that what you're doing right now might not be what you're going to be doing in 6 to 12 months. I think is important. I think it's like, if you're, what is it? They talk about like being in love with the problem, not with the solution.
Mhm.
And I think acknowledging that, like, like um, you know, a founder's life, there's a lot of fluidity. And so it's like, sometimes, I mean, sometimes like, big macro things change, which make it really hard. Like, you might have a great idea, a great product, even like a great go-to-market motion. And then like the whole world changes out from underneath you. And you're like, okay, well, again, I have to pivot. and
Yeah. The point about asking customers earlier to pay and
yeah,
getting the product in their hands earlier, I've seen that in my own founder days and talking to so many other founders over the years. Like, it's a very common reflection. Why do you
yeah.
think so many founders wait later to ask for the money or the usage?
I mean, I think part of it is, I mean, people get excited to build things,
Mhm,
and like, and I think there's a reluctance to ask people to pay you for something that doesn't exist.
mhm,
Like, I mean, like, I think if, like, if you come from a consulting background, I think you're like, okay, you're used to saying like, I'm going to go build this thing for you. But I think when you're building a company, building a product, you're not thinking about it as a consulting model. You're not like, I don't like, I mean, because like, you don't like, and I think that the 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 needle you have to thread there is like, when you ask people to pay for it in advance, you don't want to be building a product just for them. And so, like, how do you navigate the, like, this is what I'm building, I would love to take your money in advance,
mhm.
versus you are paying me to build your spec. And I think I think people, struggle a little bit with that. I think, on the flip side, it's like, I think it's a little bit different too, with like, depending on your funding model. Like with a venture backed company, you have more runway to like build before you get a lot of utilization and payment. Whereas like in a bootstrapped company, like, like, you have to, like, you're dependent on that revenue right away. And so I think you're much more willing to ask. Like, certainly at my startup I was at before Google, like, like when we got started, like, most of it was like, it's like, okay, like, here's the idea of the thing we want to build. What do you guys think? Would you be willing to pay for that in advance? And like, and that's how we funded like the first 2 years of like, here's what we want to build, and like got a bunch of pharma companies to say, yes, that's important. We'll pay for that. Um, I would say that works well if you're a known quantity to the person that you're selling to, when they're
Mhm.
like, I trust that you're going to build something good. So so I think that's another challenge there is like, in order to take money from people in advance, you have to have some existing, relationship or credibility with them to make them feel like it's worth making a bet that you're actually going to deliver what they're paying for.
And Joe, you mentioned that there are some clear advantages of Jade over consumer offerings, like
Hmm.
the security, the privacy, the tuning for the medical use cases. How do you feel about these foundational off-the-shelf models just getting better every few months? Like, do you worry a little that the gap will be too narrow, or do you think you'll be able to stay ahead of it? And
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think our goal here is to ride the wave of those increases. And
Mhm,
like, I mean, there is, so much that's unique about healthcare, and so much of like the data that you would want to train on for the big foundational models doesn't exist in the public domain. So I do think that I mean, I think they're going to get really good, but I think there is a limit to how good that they can get in certain domains and subspecialties. And so that's why I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for much more vertically focused organizations building on top of the foundational models. But I think it's also like, you know, ultimately, especially in healthcare, it's like the best technology doesn't win. It's like, it's the best integrated solution that solves a problem. And so there's a lot of room for harnessing better and better infrastructure, as long as you're solving a great problem there. So I think there's a continued lots of opportunity for us in that space. That being said, like I think it would be a terrible idea to go out and build my own foundation model right now. It's like um, I just don't think it makes sense to try. I mean, unless you have like very specific domain specificity, I think trying to build your own foundational model doesn't make sense when you look at the pace at which the other ones are growing at.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joe, I'm excited that you're going to be joining us in December for our panel discussion on the future of product management.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be a fun one for sure. But before we wrap up with this interview, are there any other things that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to share in terms of things that might be useful for the PMs out there that follow
Yeah,
us?
things that might be useful for PMs out there. Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think feedback is a good question, is a good topic. I do think it comes down to like, you know, thinking about like why someone wants you to solve a problem is a big thing. It's like, it's like, what is the motivate? Like, oftentimes people will tell you they have a problem and you can get them to articulate what the
Mhm.
problem is, but like, why do they want to solve that problem? And is it, what is the impact going to be to them if you solve that problem for them? Because it's, it's not that hard to say, here are a whole bunch of problems I have.
Mhm.
And sometimes solving, and like, yeah, I'd be happy if you solved any of them. But sometimes like their problems are more important to you than elsewhere. And so I think, you know, um, and finding the people who have a strong why for the problem to be solved is really important, because then they become your champions and your advocates, and it's like really important to find those folks that are going to go above and beyond working with you to find that, and and those are going to be the people who are going to use your product when there are warts on it, and they're going to be the ones giving you the feedback because they want it to get better. So I think like um, just taking I think that idea of just taking a step further than understanding, well, what problem do you have, but also like how important is it to you, or like what's driving this problem for you, because that's how you find a lot of your chief advocates.
100%. Yeah, this has been super, super helpful, Joe. How can people stay connected to you and follow your progress and thoughts?
Yeah, people are would love for people to follow us on LinkedIn. Jaide Health has a page there that people are able to follow. Can follow me on LinkedIn as well, and feel free to just check out our page, or reach out to us through the website Jaide health.com. And if you're interested, let us know, and we'll happy to set people up with demos.
Love it. Well, thanks again for
All right.
joining, Joe, and we'll see you in December.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Great to see you.
Later. Bye. All right. So, closing thoughts from Tom. First is unbelievable how many founders tell me that they wish they had put their product out earlier and gotten customers to use it or ideally pay for it earlier. And it just resonates so much with me because it reminds me of my first startup where, my God, we had that thing in closed beta for so long because we were like, oh, we just want to like perfect it, blah, blah, blah. But if you really get to the bottom of it, at least for me, it was like, well, I don't think this thing's good enough and I don't want to fail. But uh, that's kind of your job, is to fail as quickly as possible to find out why so that you can figure out like the pivot that will get you to that win. And as a founder or, 0 to 1 p.m., every day matters, so better to put something really half baked out there, um, especially since I often tell founders this, that if your idea is as good as it as you think it is. And if the problem you're solving is as big of a problem and unmet of a need as you believe it to be, then even your 1/10 baked solution should get some traction. You shouldn't have to have the perfect offering out there for you to actually start getting repeat usage, right? So that's point one. I think point two was something that Joe said at the end of the interview, which is yes, you want to know what the big problem is, but also knowing why it's a problem and who is it a problem for, and how does solving this problem move the needle for the company, for the CEO of this company, of this customer. I think PMs, if we could become experts in our user and our customer and their business as their problem, your ability to prioritize that roadmap or to figure out what metric to optimize for is just going to be orders of magnitude more precise and sharper and more impactful than the person who kind of gets the customer problem and is just kind of throwing out features. So I thought that was a pretty profound point from Joe. And I think the third one is the conversation we had around what is your view on the foundational kind of AI capabilities getting better and better? And his point was, well, we're riding that wave, we're benefiting from it. It's a tailwind. Um, I've heard that from a lot of startups where their position is, well, we are going to be deeply integrated into the workflow. We have the domain expertise, and then we'll use the foundational improvements as kind of the boiler room. I think that makes a lot of sense. I do wonder when that consumer offering is good enough. In Jaide's case, like, ooh, if the ChatGPT live translation feature is really good and easy and available on every phone, are you going to be able to stop the clinicians from just firing that up? And is the hospital going to be willing to pay for the official kind of medically certified one that requires them to install a bunch of stuff? And so that's, I guess, a open question. We have to revisit that one maybe in a year or two and see where do all these vertical SaaS startups end up going and who wins and who doesn't and why. But hopefully you found this conversation useful. I alluded to the December panel discussion with Joe. I have a product leader from YouTube. I have a product leader from Amazon, and then a couple of startup product leaders. And we're going to talk about what is the future of the product management profession in a world where AI does more and more. And how do you think about hiring? How do you think about training? How do you think about organizing your product team? So if that's a topic of interest, make sure you follow me wherever you're watching, be it LinkedIn, Substack, or YouTube. There's also the Fireside PM podcast. That panel discussion we're going to do privately, but the people who filled out the Future PM survey will be invited to join that one. And then they'll be able to ask questions in the live chat. And then later, for everybody else who didn't fill out the survey, not to worry, if you subscribe to Fireside PM and any of the platforms, we'll push out like the summary after. But if you really want to get into it and ask questions and be the first to kind of be in that conversation, just fill out my Future PM survey, which is on my LinkedIn and Substack. So if you found this helpful, do me a solid and like it and share it, and then comment below on what did you think about how Joe recommended you talk to customers and using this framework of giving them options versus asking them for feedback on the one thing that you're planning on building. With that, let's get back to work and ship some greatness. See ya.